So hello everyone, welcome on into another edition of GSA on Twitch live from TAGC. I have a very special guest today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Joanna Wardwell-Ozgo. I am a new assistant professor at Kennesaw State University, which is just north of Atlanta. I'm in the Drosophila community, so I use flies to study how hormones affect our bodies. We know that hormones do stuff to our bodies, puberty, but we don't actually know the details of what happens in our cells when they get exposed to hormones, and that's really fascinating to me. So I'm using flies to do that, because flies also have hormones. They have a little puberty. If you consider the pupa, that kind of like awkward transition from caterpillar to butterfly, that's their puberty. But unlike us, when they get pimples, they can just like hang out in a pupa case and nobody has to see it. They get to do their awkward, ugly duckling stage in the confines of a very safe cocoon. We have to live it out loud.
How protective is that cocoon from, are there any social pressures that these animals might have as a pupa?
Interesting. No, well, so the really kind of determinant factor for them in successful, and it is for us too, is nutrition status. So if you think about it, a caterpillar, so I'll use caterpillar to butterfly because it's easier than larva or maggot for people who don't love them, to adult fly. But they don't eat when they're in their cocoon. And they need to essentially trash most of their organs to rebuild adult organs. So not necessarily social pressure, but definitely nutrition. That's a really big thing. And so it's a really kind of interesting model because we don't really understand fully how our environment affects our biology all the time. So there's questions like that I can answer too by kind of thinking about hormones and how all this works.
What got you into that particular question? So you mentioned that you're currently a professor. Could you take us a quick journey through how you got to fruit fly ugly ducklingness?
Yeah, I am from rural South Texas, and I really love science. I was a really weird kid. I loved science a lot, and I would always talk about science and notice stuff in nature. But I didn't know that academia was something I could do. I'm a first-gen student, and so add like rural South Texas, plus first-gen status, I didn't quite understand anything that happened in a university system. And I went to undergrad and wanted to be a medical doctor because that's what I thought you did if you like science. And so the other thing I knew you had to do, because I was told, was get into a lab. And so I joined a lab and I loved it. I found a place that I really, really loved. Applied to medical school still because I didn't think I was smart enough to become a scientist. And so I was hired to work as a technician for 2 years between my undergrad and my graduate work. And my mentor just kept encouraging me like, hey, you should go to grad school. I was like, I am not that smart. And I finally listened to him, and not getting into medical school, got into every graduate school. In grad school, I switched models and went into kind of translational melanoma work. So cancer is something that's really, really interesting. And I loved doing that, but I also acknowledged that grad school is really tough for any number of different reasons. And I did not, at the time, want to be a mentor to people in graduate school because I was watching all of my friends just like struggle mentally and emotionally with there's a lot of change that happens in grad school. Most people are in their 20s, so there's like all kinds of like personal growth happening too, because you're kind of out on your own outside of the like K through 12 university industrial system. And so I decided to go back into flies, and I went to Emory University to postdoc. And I actually stumbled on this like ugly duckling question because I really liked to molecularly clone things. Something I did as an undergrad and I really enjoyed. And my mentor in Atlanta, Ken Moberg, was trying to find someone to build a fly that would allow us to disrupt hormone signaling, and nobody wanted to do it because nobody wanted to clone. And I was like, that's me, I will do this. And so I started this project and I didn't really know what to do with it for a really long time. And then I started kind of playing around with it and I was like, wow, there's a lot about hormones that we don't quite understand. And so that's kind of how I am now. So now I have my own lab with students kind of asking questions about what hormones do.
That's really, really cool. We've got some questions coming in regarding, you mentioned first-gen student.
Mm-hmm.
You're also a woman in science.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about some of the challenges that you still encounter, and how you can overcome them for those who are also thinking about getting into the sciences, but like you mentioned, there are these barriers still in place?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't even know the questions I needed to ask. The pathway for me felt very narrow because I didn't quite understand anything, and so there was just a lot of stumbling around in the dark. And so I think the advice I would have is don't be afraid to talk about your identity, and you don't have to get it right the first time. I have colleagues who knew what they wanted to do in high school, and they did graduate school or undergrad, then they did graduate school, then they did a postdoc, and it's like a very straight path. I have been all over the place. I took time to tech because I wasn't sure if this is what I really wanted to do. I think just being willing to try something even though it's scary, and talk about not knowing things even though it's scary, because I think there's more of us out there than we let on. And just be prepared to not give up, because so what I didn't say is, in coming to my postdoc, I wanted to work with undergrads, so I went back into the fly, and I really wanted to get into this program at Emory that's supported by the National Institute of Health, that's designed to build a professor and provide them with training and teaching so that they are an effective teacher and mentor. And I knew I wanted to work with undergrads, so I wanted to try to get into this program, and I didn't. But I communicated with the program, like, hey, I'm coming to Atlanta because I want to try again to get into this program. You're going to be hearing from me again. I'm going to be hanging out. And 3 days before I started my postdoc, they said, we actually have a spot. Would you be interested? And so just by kind of communicating, I don't know how to get it done, but I'm going to keep trying, has been very effective. In helping me kind of navigate spaces that I don't quite understand how to work into.
There's a lot of persistence there.
Oh my gosh, so much stubbornness.
Did you find any instances where you felt like, you were at a disadvantage being like the first gen? Like, I'm just showing like from a knowledge perspective of like the different pathways. Like, my parents are immigrants, and I had no idea how to navigate the system of what schools are beyond like, we know this name from Europe.
Yeah, I didn't know how wide the world was, and I think that's maybe, it's worked out for me, but I didn't have a lot of options going into undergrad because my parents, as blue-collar workers, didn't have a lot of money, didn't really understand scholarship systems, so I wasn't necessarily applying to scholarships. I was at a rural school who also, like, the counseling center there, did their best, but they had limited resources. And so I didn't know I could go out of state. I didn't know for graduate school that I could kind of go anywhere I wanted to go. And so I think I limited myself because I couldn't see beyond what I knew. But in that limitation, I found something that worked. I found places that I could grow, and places that I was able to get myself to the next point. And at each step along the way, I was given enough time to kind of like, okay, figure it out, to launch the next step.
Speaking of figuring it out, you also have kids.
I do have kids.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how that has maybe changed or not changed your research, and how you deal with perspective of balance, but also social expectations as being a woman in science and having kids, and how to navigate that minefield?
Yeah, this is actually, I don't necessarily see a lot of advantages of being first gen, but honestly, I feel like my ignorance in this standpoint is kind of one of them. I had kids in grad school. So I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and then a 10-month-old son. And I had babies in grad school, and I didn't think anything of it. Where my friends who understood the system were like, well, we're gonna wait to get married and we're gonna wait to have kids until I'm a professor, so I have all my career planned out. I was just like, no, this time feels right for me personally. I'm gonna kind of go ahead and jump. And so I'm really glad I did it, because I think I'm a better scientist for being a parent. I have somebody to go home to that distracts me from, that distracted me from a failed experiment or, a headache. And it has made my career not as fast as other people, but I have a very full life in that, I get to wear these different hats and be these kind of different things. And I feel that now as an assistant professor, where I'm kind of balancing teaching and mentoring and research, being a parent has advantaged me a little bit, because the juggling, it just feels like second nature, right? Like I can send an email on my phone while, I'm, rocking the baby to sleep or something like that. Like I'm able to figure out how to squeeze in a little bit of work when those pockets of time present themselves. So I feel like I wouldn't have done this had I known the challenges, but because I was first gen, I had no idea that it would be hard, and it is hard. So I just did it, and so, I don't know, you keep going.
So what advice would you give to those out there in the audience, in the chat, on the YouTube afterwards? Like, if I'm, wanting to get into science as a first gen or a woman in STEM, or wanted to be a woman in STEM, what would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned along the way, and or the best piece of advice you can give someone, or even if they know that this might be a challenge because of the reasons that we've talked about, how to just mentally push past that and know that you are good enough to succeed, and it should not be at a crutch because you want to have a family or...
Yeah. I think it takes a village. And I think at each point in my career, I have had a core group of people who didn't necessarily share all of my identities, but shared enough. Because the dirty secret of STEM is that it sucks for everyone at certain points of time. We just never talk about it. And the village aspect of it, and I've had some wonderful women who have helped me through this, but the village aspect of it is, oh my gosh, my experiment failed. We used to have in graduate school, we used to have rogue lunches where we would go off and we would like grab a bite to eat and a drink during lunch, because like it was just awful. We just had a bad day. And that really helped bring perspective, because so much of STEM is failure. And that failure gets internalized and personalized, but it's not us. We can't control everything. And so the acknowledgement and the building a village helps to acknowledge that it's not just me. It's not just me that's feeling like this, it's everyone. And then that village shows up for you when you have a baby and you have to do something, and they kind of swoop in and help make it work. And bring meals if things get crazy, or just come over and play with your kid and talk science, so you don't feel, like if your kid's been sick, so you don't feel like you're kind of going crazy with dealing with a sick kiddo. So find people. They don't have to be exactly like you, but find people at similar stages as you to build a village. And then find someone doing what you're doing and ask them to be your mentor, or what you want to do. I've never had somebody tell me no when I've walked up to them and like, I admire the way that you're doing this. If I ever have any questions, can I shoot you an email? Can we have a coffee? Can I buy you lunch and talk through something? I've never had anybody tell me no. They've always felt very honored to be able to be seen in that light, and that's provided me a lot of like insight of like, okay, here's how you prioritize stuff when you're kind of going through it.
Seems very much like one of those soft skills that you tend not to learn in a schooling program, but you get through a really good mentor.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk about, for chat, what is your advice for finding a good mentor that would be receptive to these kinds of things, right? Because sometimes that's a challenge too, not just for first gen in STEM, women in STEM, but like you said, everyone in STEM, of getting that right mentor who's going to be supportive. Let's say you wanting to be a teaching positions, or out of academia and industry, or in the sciences and everything in between.
Yeah, this person cannot be your research mentor. I believe in research or mentor teams. Because not one person is going to fulfill all the roles that you're looking for to develop the skills that you're looking for or the identities that you share. So I think you have to look beyond your research mentor. And what I wish I would have done, and kind of like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do coming out of grad school and teching, going into academia. I didn't know that I was going to kind of want to go back into flies. And then when I actually got into my postdoc, I was like, I never want to interact with grad students, but the grad students I interacted in with my lab were so lovely. I was like, no, I think I could provide something here. I think I could do something. So my idea of what I wanted has changed, and I didn't always identify it at the beginning, but when I figured it out, I was like, okay, I need to find somebody so that I can ask them this question. I need to find somebody so I can talk about in graduate school this program that the NIH offers to make a kind of complete professor, the IRACTA program. I need to find out about this program, what they're looking for, how do I present myself in the right light. And that was not anything that my research mentor could provide insight on. And so the research mentor has a role in kind of directing your progress and helping you develop as a scientist. But some of these other softer skills, I think you have to seek outside. So you just build your network.
How did you know to seek them?
Looking back, I think I just felt lost and overwhelmed. And now I realize, okay, this is what I did. And so I encourage all of my students, like, I can't fulfill your roles. I can't fulfill all of your roles. So let's find somebody who's going to be able to do this. Let's make you think about this. And my research mentor, as much as he did for me, didn't really help me to kind of think about the softer skills and kind of where I wanted to go. So it's something I'm trying to encouraging my mentees to do and my students to do is, let's think about where you want to go so we can loop in other people to kind of get you there. But it was just kind of fumbling around in the dark in desperation, like, and it was always at the last minute because I figured it out at the very end. And it was like, okay, I need to act quickly and I need to figure out how to get to the next space. So let me go try to find somebody who will talk to me about this.
So we have a question in the chat wondering about what kind of things that you teach and how is, you mentioned at the start, it's a different kind of university. It's an R2 level. What does that mean for you as a professor and your lab?
So an R2 university means there isn't necessarily a, it's still research heavy, but just not as research intensive as like a medical school environment. So research is a little bit slower. The population that Kennesaw State serves are mostly rural. There's a minority majority, and there's a lot of socioeconomic diversity with a lot of low-income students. Like a call to my heart. These are my people. These are the student that I was. So I teach cell biology right now, and it's funny, we're on cell signaling, and I have like rethought how I'm going to teach. I think I'm gonna like talk about some of these talks that I went to, because it's really cool to expose students to science, because these students haven't had a lot of exposure to science. And so I'm trying to use my classroom as a way to be like, hey, this is a possibility. Like, look at all these cool things. Science is not just stuck here in this textbook. It's actively happening all around us. And then I'm gonna teach medical genetics. So I'm really excited about talking about inheritable disease, eugenics, like all kinds of stuff that's really, really important when we think about how genetics affects us as a human and as a society.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
What is one time where you had a very difficult experiment?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us like how you dealt with quote unquote a failed experiment?
Yeah, it's very, I'm gonna go all the way back to my undergrad for this one. So I graduated in 2007, and my mentor was really, really interested in understanding global changes that happen when a cell dies. So what are all of the different changes that happen in a cell? And there was a brand new technology called microarray out, but they didn't make a fly microarray. And so we were able to buy a fly microarray but not from one of the kind of the major companies doing RNA analysis. And he's like, okay, I want you to play around with this. I want you to do this. And it did not work. I could not get it to work. I could not get anything to hybridize. I could not get any changes. It was essentially 2 years of, I think we're just gonna have to wait until technology catches up and Agilent brings on a, chip for flies. And the funnier thing was that was my honors thesis, my undergrad honors thesis, and so I had to really grapple with the fact that very early on, the science can fail spectacularly. So one of the things that I did was I pivoted to something that I felt a little bit more confident on, that I could get a result. And I still tried. I never gave up. I mean, the last day I left, I was still trying to get the darn washes to work, to try to get this microarray to work. So I didn't give up on it, but I also acknowledged that I was banging my head against the wall and I needed a win. And so I looked for something small, building a fly, like something that I knew I could do, something that I could feel confident in, so that I could remind myself, this is not you. You are capable, you do belong, you can do this science. But sometimes science is hard, and sometimes things happen that you can't control. So let's give yourself a little win as you continue to kind of struggle through this.
It's interesting, Chad's saying, I've never really thought about having to wait for technology to catch up to need for what you do for your experiments, but that's a really good point. And like you're saying, if you're on the front lines of testing, it may or may not work.
Yeah.
On a happier note, what is one of the coolest results that you've ever gotten in terms like that you really excited you, where you're like, wow, we got something really exciting here?
So for here, I'll go to my postdoc. Ken Moberg, my mentor, he calls it like night science, the kind of science you do under the table that your mentor doesn't quite fully know that you're doing, but you're kind of playing around with something that you're not quite really ready to tell him. He wanted me to build this fly so we could play around with hormone signaling, and I did it, and I did a couple experiments and I didn't quite understand what was happening. I was seeing something I didn't really make sense with my prediction, and so I kind of put it on the shelf and ignored it. And then one day I was like, no, I should kind of start kind of playing around with this. And so I work on the larval stage, the developmental stage, and so I dissected and I imaged, and I was sitting on the microscope, on this confocal microscope, very expensive microscope that allows you to see changes inside a cell. And I was looking at this wing disc, and I was like, oh my gosh, my experiment worked. And I took a picture of the screen and I sent it to him, and I was like, hey, I haven't told you about this, but I've been doing this in the background. It worked. I moved over to the next image, the next wing disc, the next tissue, and I see something completely different. And I'm like, uh-oh. I cannot unsend this text message. It just like bragged about me getting this experiment to work. Now I'm seeing this something that's very, very different. And I had this like mixed population, and so I was like, okay, I need to redo this. I've clearly messed up. I've mixed up my samples. Let me be really, really careful next time I do this. Still had 2 different things that I was seeing. And what actually I was seeing was that time matters. Time was not a variable I was controlling for, but it's a variable I have to control for now. And so it was really cool to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't mess up. This is because time matters. But then, oh my gosh, I have to care about timing, which is insane. So yeah, like it was a really, really cool moment to go from like, oh my gosh, I have completely messed up this experiment and messed up my samples and been sloppy, to be like, actually no, a new variable has entered the stage.
That is a very apt way of saying it. Almost finds like a Mortal Kombat style.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Joanna, and again, thank you for your time today. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the audience of like, just like leaving them with a message of like whether, you know, woman in STEM, first gen in science, or anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
I think your dream is worth chasing. I feel really, because I didn't really know what I was doing or how to get there, my path has been all the more meaningful and all the more fulfilling and all the more rewarding, because each step has clarified it, and it's not been straight and it's not been easy and it's not been pretty at times. But I can sit in this chair and say, I know that this is where I'm supposed to be. I went to graduate school on purpose, not on accident. I'm a professor at this institution with these students on purpose and not on accident, because these are my people. And so it's a learning, pursuing your dream is learning about who you are and what your values are. And that's worth fighting for and rooting for.
Well, thank you so much, Joanna. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time and your insight today.
Awesome, thank you.